Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. With the Formula 1 podcast for fans and by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-driver, shall I say my co-host Sam. Hi Sam, how are you?
Bonjour Will, bonjour listeners, ça va?
Ça va bien, merci, et toi?
Oui, ça va, merci.
Very good. I mean, I think, très bien, I should say. That might be the extent, apart from if you want me to order some croissants for you. That might be the extent of my French. I don't know. What level is your French at?
Very poor. I didn't even take it for GCSE.
Oh, well, I did, and we feel like we're at a very similar level. So, yeah,
A couple of years well spent.
yeah, exactly. Are you all good? Are you all well?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I had a very nice, very quiet weekend. Yeah, weekends feel quite empty without Formula One. I mean, the last few, for a little while, it felt a bit empty, obviously, because we haven't had Formula One or any football, really. But now the Premier League is back and the cricket is over. So, yeah, it feels like I've just gone through like a bit of a sporting change over the course of the last week or so. So we're now back fully in kind of football Formula One mode again.
And the football will be here for a good, basically like 10 months now, right?
It will. I'm sure it will crop up from time to time on this podcast. I know you love to make a little comparative reference to make me feel bad about Arsenal cocking it up. Anyway,
you're more than welcome to make Wigan references.
Oh, you had a good result of the weekend, I think.
Yeah, we won. Our 8-point deficit now from when we started at -8 because of breaking loads of rules. We're now down to -2 after 2 games. So yeah, here comes the league title next.
Very good. How was your weekend?
It was very good. I was at another wedding. That's 2 in 2 weekends. Yes,
another one.
And I was actually in Exeter as well. So yeah, a friend of my partner's, which was good fun. Very nice reception and ceremony. Very special. There was a slight rain shower, but luckily they provided umbrellas for everyone, so we were well protected. But they now probably have 140 umbrellas. So good luck to them. They're well equipped for a storm.
Yeah, I should imagine they will be. Yeah, very good. That sounds nice.
Yeah, it was good. And how are you coping with that Formula 1? You mentioned the football's back. Are you missing the races much? Are you missing the drama? I mean, I should say quite silly season's been very very quiet so far.
It's been sensible season, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's
unusual.
been dull season.
Yeah, very unusual. I have missed the Formula One, although I am aware that the next race is one that I voted to bin off in our circuit podcast a few episodes ago. So maybe I'll feel differently when we have to go to Zandvoort. But it will be good to have it back. Yeah, it will be good to have it back. I'm just quite. I mean, I've made my peace with Red Bull and Max and all of that. I'm quite looking forward to just seeing how the battle for second place shapes up now, and whether we can see anybody potentially finish ahead of Sergio Perez, which would be quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, apart from that, I mean, we are where we are, right? We've talked about the season a lot already in the various podcasts. We both know how we feel about it. But it will be good to have some cars on track back.
Yeah. It should be a fun event.
It will be a very orange, very smoky, but a very idyllic fan event. I don't know. Like every time I don't rate the track at all in Zandvoort, but it's a stunning location. It's really like beautiful. It's like right on the coast, and
literally next to the sea, isn't it?
Yeah, it does look nice. But yeah, will be a fan event, as you say.
So today we thought we'd have a bit of a deep dive into sort of looking at what's going wrong at Alpine. We've teased this. We've mentioned Alpine a couple of times throughout the season, and we actually did in our underrated drivers. We both picked Alpine drivers. So if you've not listened to that, go back and listen to what we both made of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly and find out who picked who. Obviously they're not having a good season. Where do we start? I mean, let's just summarize the situation. Yep. So where are they at the moment? They're 6th in the constructors, 57 points behind McLaren in 5th. That's a pretty sizable gap for a midfield team. They've had 3 double DNFs where both cars have failed to finish in races, and there was that period where they're in consecutive weekends. The target this year was to maintain 4th, which they are currently a massive 134 points adrift from. That is massive backward regression. There's no positives there.
Yeah.
We've had the team principal, the sporting director, Pat Fry as well, who's involved in the technical stuff as well.
He's the CTO.
CTO, Chief Technical Officer. They all went the same weekend, which I don't think we've ever seen happened in Formula One history before, where so many senior figures from one team have left, during a race weekend. Their CEO in charge of Alpine, the car company, was also sacked as well, and moved. It was not sacked. Sorry, he was moved into special projects, which is probably basically just gardening leave. For those that don't know, Alpine they were a rebrand of the Renault Formula One team. So Renault came back into the sport in 2016. They left the sport in 2010 after not being very successful, and then there's a whole drama with Fernando Alonso and crashing. Basically they engineered a race in Singapore for him to win. That's a whole drama in itself. But they left the sport in 2010, came back in 2016, produced engines. They had Red Bull as a customer, and their engines kept blowing up. So Red Bull left and joined Honda, then became world champions with Honda. And then in 2 years ago, Renault rebranded to Alpine, which is the Renault's sport car business, to try and help sell and establish Alpine as a business and promote them. As that was the classic sort of in the olden days. Like you'd if Ferrari won on a Sunday, people would go and buy a Ferrari on a Monday. Similar with Mercedes, sort of marketing sort of purpose as well. So I think it's helpful just to clarify who Alpine are and what Alpine are. So they come from big money, from a major manufacturer, French obviously, but based the split across France and in Enstone as well. Sam, what are your initial sort of thoughts on this massive change that we've seen with lots of senior people, but also the poor performance of Alpine? What's your current assessment of this situation at the team?
So I think they've underperformed, but they've also been quite unlucky on track. I think they've been a bit of a disaster off track, is my assessment of the situation. So on track, I don't think the drivers have done badly. I think Ocon, and we've talked about Ocon and Gasly in that episode, we both rate them pretty highly. They are very good drivers. They're generally pretty reliable point scorers, and I think in good machinery, they'd be if not in the top 3 every week, I think they'd be up there. Like they'd be challenging for good points finishes and podiums pretty regularly because they are of that caliber. And yeah, they've been a bit unfortunate in some races. So they both got taken out in Australia, and then they got absolutely pirouetted into, didn't they? More recently as well. So they had a couple of DNFs from like engine failures because Renault, which we'll come to. But generally speaking, I think on track they've been a bit unfortunate. But if you couple that misfortune with generally what's been going on off track, which will probably form the lion's share, I suspect, of this podcast, it's not a particularly good combination because, as you've sort of mentioned already, there, like all of the senior leadership team have gone. They've got like temporary people in place now. The temporary person they've got in place at the moment isn't great by all accounts either. He was responsible for engine development for the last 3 or 4 years, and we know that the Alpine or the Renault engine is quite significantly behind its rivals in terms of power output. So they've taken a guy who's responsible for a poor engine and put him in charge of everything for the moment. And I guess as well, I think a lot of the off-track stuff, I think you see changes that happen in other teams, but even in like, and we give Ferrari a bit of a hard time sometimes on this podcast for being a bit of a meme from time to time. Even when off-track stuff happens and changes in those teams, it's not quite as, it doesn't seem as bitter as it is with Alpine. Like they've got some pretty high-profile people involved, and some of the comments and stuff that have been thrown about by some of those people has been like, you just don't hear that from any other team. Like it tends to be like, when someone departs a Ferrari or a Mercedes or a Red Bull, even if it's a bit contentious, generally it's done in a relatively classy way. Not the case with Alpine. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess really. I think they've got a lot of things they need to get right, and all of this is in the context of a 100 race plan that they put into place in 2021 to get back to the front, which basically meant by 2026 they want to be challenging for wins and for championships again. And it just doesn't look at all likely, does it really? As you say, they're going backwards. So yeah, that's my general assessment. On track, bit unlucky. Off track, woeful.
Yeah. I also think as well, but like they always say, like people that, I don't know if you ever experienced this at work, but like when people come to work and they bring their like whatever going on in their personal life to the office or into the job, that then affects their performance in the job. It's probably a bit like that in the team. Like all the drama, all the politics that's going on behind the scenes is then seeping through into the performance of the drivers. And yes, they have been unlucky with crashes and stuff, but even when I think they've only had one podium, and that was in Monaco, they've not had, it's not been a clinical race team performance throughout a weekend, really. I think they have been very unlucky as well. And I mean, I think for me, the first major warning sign, I think we flagged this actually in our Miami episode, was after 4 races, the CEO Rossi was voicing his displeasure about the team, sort of criticizing the performance in this first few races. He called them amateurish as well, and said there would be consequences if there wasn't improvement. I mean, kind of ironic now that he's also been moved on, but yeah, I mean that obviously that was obviously a shtick he probably tried to do to try and G up and get everyone focused, but it's obviously not worked because results haven't got massively improved. But also you've now seen people they've put in 3 senior positions all go.
Yeah, it is crackers, and there's definitely a kind of there's a corporate challenge there, I think, which maybe we'll talk about in the second half when we get into the detail of like some of the factors that are causing this continued slump, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. Because it's worth noting that like Renault have been in the sport a long time. Like they were Benetton years and years ago. They won World Championship with Michael Schumacher in the 90s. Then obviously with Alonso in the mid 2000s as Renault, and then they were Lotus, and they were pretty good when they were Lotus for a while as well. They had some good drivers, and
with Kimi,
and did pretty well. And it's been a really a continued sustained slump now for a good couple of years. Like they have been steadily going backwards, and just like their ambition and kind of meeting that level of ambition from a kind of corporate level feels like something they're really struggling to make happen at the moment, particularly with the budget that they're operating on. So yeah, it's hard to see what direction it goes in, really. But what do you make of the kind of Otmar Schaffenauer fallout in particular? Because he's got quite a good reputation, isn't he, in the paddock, generally speaking. Like everybody who's worked with him, apart from a couple of people who we will reference at some point in this podcast, everybody's favourite driver.
Who could that be?
Yeah, he's got quite a good reputation. People seem to like working for him. They think he's a good leader. He was a bit unfortunate to get canned the way he was in Aston Martin. So what do you make of that whole debacle?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think Otmar Safnauer, the team principal going, I think that's probably the most significant of the losses they've had, because I think he, like you say, he's well respected, and I think he ran a good team when it was Force India, when it became Racing Point, and then those first early days of Aston Martin. And it sounded like from what he said that he kind of left Aston Martin because he just wasn't. I think he was being put under far too much pressure by the owner, Lawrence Stroll. And so I've always rated him. I thought, like you say, he's come across very well in the media. I think he's quite highly held in high regard. And I kind of feel like I agree with probably his assessment of what's going on. And quite luckily, he's been quite public in his views. He said he set out quite a realistic timeline to Alpine, about which they obviously didn't agree with. And he's been sacked after only 33 races, which is, I don't think is the best partnership. And he obviously shows you that the powers above him felt they could just manage him and manage it from a boardroom, whereas they should have just left him to just run the team completely and just trust him to do that. And that, that's something I'll come on to in a minute, is some of the most successful teams we've seen is that partnership between the owners or the people running at the very, very top of the team, letting the team principal just completely own and run the racing operation, and the team operation. I don't think he got that confidence. And Otmar Safnauer, when he left, probably with one of the best quotes we'll probably see all season, said, "You can't get 9 women pregnant and hope to have a baby in a month," which I thought was just very, very good at sort of saying that they probably think they should get wins now. And I think as well, he also went on quite a hiring spree and brought on some really good people that were still on gardening leave or couldn't come across just yet. So he's never going to see them come into the jobs, and he can't reap the benefits of that because they've got rid of him, after the Spa race, which is a bit mad. What about you? Any sort of further thoughts on Otmar's departure?
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate, I think. I just don't agree with the principle that you hire a guy basically to deliver you a long-term 2 to 3 year strategy and then sack him 11 races into a season because it's not going as well as you'd like.
Or if he's been honest to you and said, this is unachievable.
Yeah, and I don't... Yeah, exactly. This is it. I mean, and this is part of the kind of issue they have around how they are structured in comparison to other teams. Like, he didn't have the autonomy that so many other team principals have. It is a shame. I don't doubt he'll bounce back. I'm sure he'll find another team principal job pretty quickly, I would have thought.
Yeah, I'm trying to just think of where he can end up. Maybe someone like AlphaTauri. I think they'll probably be looking.
Well, Franz Tost had enough, hasn't he? I think he's moving on apparently at the end of the season. So,
I know he'll definitely be back in the sport as well. I mean, I think we've obviously seen this exodus now at the moment. But I think one of the most biggest losses actually for Alpine was actually 2 years ago with Alain Prost, 4-time world champion, nicknamed the Professor. They sacked him. They treated him awfully, and he was sort of saying, the team needs a simple structure, detached from an industrial organization, running it. And he was pretty critical of Rossi as well, sort of saying, he was incompetent. And after sort of seeing Safnauer sacking at Spa, Prost came out again, criticised Rossi, saying it's the final. I'll read exactly what his quote was, which is quite a good quote. I like this as well. It's a close second to Otmar Safnauer, as he said, Laurent Rossi is the fine example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that of an incapable leader who thinks he can overcome his incompetence by his arrogance and his lack of humanity towards his troops. He thought he had understood everything from the start when he was totally mistaken. Which I think that so brilliantly highlights what's going on. You've obviously got someone at the very top calling the shots and just making really bad decisions, or think he can just disregard the views of the experts below him, and then no wonder they're in this mess.
I think he's not far wrong, is he really? Who are we to argue with Alain Prost anyway? But I don't think he's far wrong. And I think as well, I saw some quotes from another test driver that Renault had a few years back. I can't remember the guy's name, but he said it was something to the effect like you can't have suits running a Formula One team, and that's what it felt like. You've got corporate organisation in the shape of Renault trying to run a Formula One team from afar, and it just never works. And so it's proving to be the case, and that was kind of what Prost was always railing against, and probably what cost him his job in the end. So.
Yeah, because like I said, if you look at the most successful partnerships, you had Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher, Fernando Alonso and Flavio Briatore at Renault, just the two of them. You didn't have Renault running that whole scheme. Mercedes with they just left Toto Wolff to be in complete charge, and then he brought in the talent and got Lewis working well. At the moment with Red Bull, Christian Horner is just trusted by Dr. Helmut Marko, and obviously their former owner as well. They were just trusted just to run the operation. Whereas, say suits are never going to win you world championships or win your races.
No, definitely not. There's quite a lot of. It's funny, isn't it? There are some teams where you think it's interesting. We talked a lot about Williams this season. I feel like with a bit of investment in the right places and adding a couple of key bits of the puzzle, they could move up quite quickly and potentially overtake Alpine. Whereas you look at Alpine, this massive team, huge, history in the sport, pretty big budget, not as big as what their rivals are spending, but quite big. Never really struggle for money. It feels like they've got more pieces to put in the right place. Weirdly,
yeah. I think you sort of touched on this point earlier, but with car development as well, with the reg changes, a lot of teams improved. Haas stepped up, Williams stepped up, Aston Martin have shot forward this season. For Alpine, they've kind of plateaued since 2019. They've not really progressed at all as a up the grid. Yes, they've probably finished fourth consecutively or been there or thereabouts, but they've never really threatened for podiums. They've had their odd one or two with Daniel Ricciardo, and they obviously got lucky with the race win with Ocon. But the development of that team and of that car is not going well. And I think as well they're not. Am I correct in thinking that their sort of design is quite different to everyone else's? They don't really follow the Ferrari model. They don't follow the obviously don't have no side pods, but they're not really following the McLaren. It's quite a chunky car, isn't it? It's quite a different design to principle to everyone else, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little different. It's nearer to, well, they're going in a more Red Bull direction. They're just taking a bit longer over it than some of their rivals are. Obviously, we've seen Aston Martin and McLaren make massive strides this season or through the winter break with their own developments, and Alpine are obviously behind the curve there. They've got quite a, I don't know, Lewis loves the word diva, doesn't he? He always describes a car as a diva if it's quite difficult to pin down on circuits and on a regular basis. But I think it's probably quite an apt description for the Alpine, because there are some circuits it's quite good, and notably it's all the circuits where power isn't an issue. So like Monaco, for example, where they picked up their podium. I don't think there's any coincidence they picked up that podium in a car with 20 brake horsepower less than all of their rivals.
Wow.
Yeah, it does seem quite a flaky car, and on any circuit that where power is a consideration, it's going to struggle. I actually think they'll be all right in Zandvoort. Whether or not they'll pick up double points, I don't know, but they'll be up there. I think it'll be nearer. But yeah, no, their development direction, and this is part of the problem with, like, you change your entire team there. So you've lost your team principal, sporting director, and your chief technical officer. And your chief technical officer is probably the most important person in the paddock for you as a team principal anyway. You're asking an awful lot of somebody to come in and pick up the ball and take the team in a direction of development that's going to get them anywhere near next year. Never mind this year. It's just like this year's basically a write-off for them now, I think.
I think that's a really good point as well, because also, so there's rumours they're going to get Bonotto, the former Ferrari team principal, in, and if he brings in his own sort of ex-Ferrari or someone poaches someone from Ferrari to be the chief technical officer, what happens if they look at where the Alpine car is? Goes, actually, we don't agree with this process. We're going to go towards the Ferrari sort of style. They'll have wasted millions and millions of pounds changing direction 2 years, 3 years after everyone else has sort of been perfecting where the sort of the path they're on. I think that's a really good point. Actually, I think that could really set them back, really. And there's a lot of pressure on getting a CTO that comes in that sort of agrees with the process and where they're going and carries it on.
Yeah, well, and I think as well they're now at a point where they really like, to some extent, there's a bit of sympathy with the fact that they've made the decision now, because they kind of, I feel like they're a bit of a crossroads, really. They either stick with and I think they probably should have done, they either stick with Safnauer and the rest of that strategic team and trust them to deliver them a car that can compete in 2026 per the plan, and you look for incremental progress over the next couple of years, or you rip it up now in the hope that you can make some really swift changes ready for, I say 2024, it's not going to be 2024, it'll be 2025 most likely. But then all the regulation changes are coming in again in 2026, and you're just a bit like, well, you're going to be in the same boat again, potentially. If you bring someone in now, take the development in a specific direction, it doesn't quite work out for you when the new regs coming in 26.
Yeah.
There's no, like, they really need to pick a path and kind of stick with it for a bit. It's...
I'd almost, if I was Renault, just prioritise the new engine. Just put so much time and energy into getting that engine regulation change right perfect, and just absolutely smashing it. So they've got a reliable, rapid engine, because they've like I said, they're not a good engine supplier at the moment, and they're not quite sure about aerodynamically to go. Why don't you capitalize on a really good engine thing? Because that's what Mercedes did. They came into the sport and absolutely smashed it out of the park with the hybrids when they first came in. So I think that's it. And also on the 5-year plan and the 100-year plan. I mean,
100 race plan.
That's the thing. There's the 100 race plan, which I think they're ditching now. But before that, they had a 5-year plan, and I just think it's a bit Soviet Unionist. That how many other teams do we hear that have got 5-year plans or 100 race plans, or make such a big deal of it? I don't know. Just
well, also really... they had a 5-year plan, and then they rebranded to Alpine, introduced a new 5-year plan. They binned off that 5-year plan for a 100 race plan, and now they're binning off the 100 race plan. I'm kind of at a point where it's like, you might as well just not have one, because you're just going to keep starting over. Like,
a 100 race plan is basically for a 4-year plan. So why don't you call it a 4-year plan? Because it's not going to say on that plan when you get to 100, oh, by the way, you're going to win. You've won the world championship at that 100th race. It's a bit it's a bit silly, really.
Well, think of it this way, right? Like I've got a 2-week plan to sort out my basement. If I make it another 2-week plan in a week's time, and then another 2-week plan a week after that, and then another 2-week plan or a 3-week plan after that, I'm pretty sure I'm not delivering on what I said I was going to, right?
Or you could change it into a 10-day win plan, where you could just, every day is a different win.
Yeah, why not?
Every task is a win. There you go. You could have your own 100-day race plan, whatever it is. Fair enough. I just don't think Ferrari or Mercedes or Red Bull at their peak operate with 100 race plans or 5-year plans like that. I think it has to be much more agile and much more. It's obviously not working, because they're obviously gone. The plan is obviously a very poor plan, and obviously you could end up committing yourself to a plan that's wrong. So you're like, oh yeah, we've got this 5-year plan, but then you learn stuff, you don't adapt it. I don't know. And it's also interesting seeing. I was reading up on this, that apparently it's quite clear now that Alpine are lacking the resources and the facilities of their rivals. Apparently within the paddock, they've got the smallest motorhome, and I know that's a small thing, but that sort of stuff shows, especially for a constructor like that, you wouldn't expect them to be under resourced or being. Imagine if Williams or Haas have got a better motorhome than them, or other facilities better than them. I think they've got a new simulator coming, but if you look at the investment that Williams are putting into their team, McLaren as well, they've just built a new wind tunnel for the team. I would be surprised if the Alpine investment into their own sort of resources and infrastructure is anywhere near that level of investment.
No, and all of that is attached to long-term plans with good people appointed that they're going to stick with.
Yeah.
How long has Zach Brown been in post at McLaren now? And look at the start of the season they had. It was truly terrible. They were by
Yeah.
far the slowest car on the grid. McLaren could have pulled the Alpine pin out any time and sacked him and the rest of the team and said, no, this is load of garbage. We're going somewhere else.
Yeah.
They haven't done. They stuck with it. They've gone in an innovative development direction, and now look at them. They're challenging for podiums every weekend.
Yeah, or even when you think when he first took over the team, the team was bare with no sponsors. Now they've got sponsors coming out their ears. They don't have enough space for all the sponsors. They made them very attractive. They've got great drivers, and it took a while for them to get improved. And then they took a few backward steps, in the last couple of seasons. I think that's a great comparison to draw to, because I think Zach Brown is the exact example that teams in the midfield should follow, and just trusting someone to just be ruthless and just run the team with complete autonomy, because like you say, he called the shots, and he called it that the design committee that they had was failing, and he got rid of a load of people and brought some new people in.
Yep, absolutely.
I think after the break we'll do a bit of a deep dive into what's caused this, what are sort of factors behind it, also look at sort of future what's the future direction of the team, what are the next sort of steps for the team, and so with that we'll take a quick break. Hello, welcome back from the break. Hope you had a jolly old time. Moving on to what's sort of where to go next for Alpine and the sort of the factors that caused the trouble for Alpine. Before we get into that, Sam, I'd like to get your view on what do you think is going through the minds of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly at the moment.
They're probably both thinking merde all the time. I suspect
that French is getting better every start of every half.
I remember that one very well.
You'll be fluent by the end.
Yeah, one of frustration, I would imagine, because they are both, as we've discussed several times now, very good Grand Prix drivers, and they are desperate to win. And I don't think they're quite in the kind of Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc level of total contempt for their own team frustration, but I suspect there is quite a lot of frustration there. So yeah, I don't know. I can't remember what their contract situations are. I mean, Ocon signed a long one a little while back, didn't he? He's probably got a few years left, and Gasly's new. So yeah. So I don't think either of them are necessarily going anywhere particularly quickly, in every sense of the word. So
very good.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're a bit stuck. I would have thought. I think a lot will depend on how the rest of the season goes. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that frustration come out a bit more regularly than it has done at the moment. I think they've both been pretty good, actually, considering they are quite feisty characters, both of them, on and off the track. I'm surprised, given some of the other things that have been said by people who work for Alpine, have worked for Alpine, or are in any way attached to Alpine, that the two drivers have basically kept stum and been pretty good about it all from a comms perspective. So yeah, I don't know how long that necessarily will hold out. A lot's going to depend on obviously who they appoint and the relationship they're able to build with the drivers, and whether or not they can assure them that they'll develop the car in such a way that they're a bit more competitive towards the end of this year and at the start of next. But it's not easy. And when you're looking at particularly Piastri and Alonso, who both were driving for Alpine or were meant to be driving for Alpine, both having quite a lovely time this season, it must be quite frustrating. How about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think they must both be quite frustrated because they're probably both in the prime of their careers right now. They probably both thought being at Alpine, they're only going to get quicker and up the grid, and they're kind of going backwards. And I think there must be that sort of, especially with Gasly, I get the sense of Gasly, he's very, very competitive. And I think if he has two pretty rubbish years at Alpine, he'll look to move on or move out of it, because he'll want to be winning races, and he'll want to be, challenging at the top. And I think he'll find it very hard being in like a very mediocre team. I think he could do that with AlphaTauri, because he was trying to rebuild his confidence, and then also that AlphaTauri ended up being quite good, especially in 2020. Like, he was rapid in that car. But yeah, I can see that sort of frustration of not living up to potential, missing out when others around them are doing really well. And I think you're right. Piastri and Alonso must feel very smug for very different reasons for not being at that at Alpine this season.
Definitely.
And I was going to say, just to think on Piastri and Alonso, but do you think that was the first warning sign or the first sort of alert that we saw that maybe Alpine weren't a properly well-run team? Obviously, we saw Alain Prost go the year before, but last summer, that was quite an achievement to lose a talented, probably the hottest young driver on the market, who's F2 and F2 and F3 champion, and then to lose a double-time world champion who they basically lined up to be the pairing. I think it's quite a well held view across fans and across the paddock that Alpine were to blame, and they were ultimately found to blame for Piastri, but their handling of that was pretty poor, right? And is that a sign of how badly run, and they've kind of just been exposed even more this season?
Yeah, I think you're right. It was an absolute shambles, that debacle. At the time I felt a bit bad for them because they did have an agreement of sorts with Piastri, but it wasn't a formal contract, and they tried to make out like it was. And they just played it all wrong. They backed Piastri into a corner by saying he joined the team without his permission, and then lo and behold, he comes out and just absolutely kills them, really, both in the media and then legally as well in the court. So yeah, it was an absolute disaster, that whole episode. Whether or not that's the start of it, I'm not sure. I think this kind of corporate malaise has been in place for a bit longer than that, and the kind of issues they've had with like Renault getting themselves involved with the Formula One team too much and expecting the moon on a stick a bit, which is what they've expected. They've been pushing for race wins, whatever, and they are spending much less than Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect a team to be winning races when you're doing that. That whole kind of expectation setting for the last 5 years has just been a bit wrong, I think.
Yeah.
And it probably all stems from that. I think, just kind of weak corporate leadership, I suppose, or an unwillingness to relinquish a level of control from Renault has sort of made the conditions perfectly right for that kind of thing to happen. But I do think that episode in particular was quite damaging for Alpine from a kind of brand perspective more than anything else. It's one thing, having a structure in place that's not quite working and perhaps not really fulfilling your potential, because you see lots of teams do that. Like Ferrari are in that place right now this season. They should be doing much better than they are. But it's only really when these big events happen and you basically have your pants pulled down in public that it's that stuff that really gets remembered. And I think as well, like that, in terms of like recruiting a new team principal, recruiting a new CTO, keeping your current drivers happy, and then recruiting replacements as and when they do move on, and they will move on eventually. That kind of episode really does stick with people, I think, and like people will think twice before going to Alpine now, and that's the worry, I think. Like they've just got rid of a load of, as we've discussed, pretty highly rated people, and there's no guarantee they can replace them with people who are willing to do it. And Binotto, we talked about him. Fine, yeah, okay. I mean, he could well be a very good team principal, but does he want that job? I don't know. I reckon he'd think twice based on what he's seen so far.
Unless he gets certain assurances that he can just be left to run it.
Yeah, but I mean, is that ever likely to be? Like, would you believe that? I don't know. No. I mean, I can't imagine Schaffner went in thinking, well, I'm just going to have to pick up the phone and talk to Renault anytime I want to make a decision. I don't know. Like, yeah, there's only so much assurances like that can give you.
Yeah.
And Binotto doesn't strike me as the type of person to just put up with that.
Yeah, I'm just on Safnauer and Alonso. I think Safnauer got put in a really bad position by Rossi. So from what I understand is that Safnauer was leading negotiations with Alonso, and I think the decision came from Rossi that they could only offer Alonso a 1-year deal with the option of a further year, whereas Alonso was seeking a 2-year fixed deal. They were kind of back and forth over that, and I think it was at Budapest where I think they basically thought they'd agreed it and it was all nailed on, and then literally the next day he signed for Aston Martin, and I think Otmar Safnauer got absolutely embarrassed and kind of got completely played by Alonso. And I think that probably was a sign of the decisions coming from on top, really, dictating that. They can't afford that again in the future, to have contradiction, or someone's setting a strategy for how you're going to keep one of your drivers, and then you just get absolutely played. And I think they got played by both drivers. And it's funny you say about being absolutely had their pants pulled down. Like we're a year on, and everyone was marking the first anniversary of Oscar Piastri's tweet, which is
Yes.
that's gone into folklore now of Formula One history, of an iconic moment in Formula One history, and it's just going to get played out every year. And Alpine are always going to get remembered for that until they probably leave the sport. It's
Yeah. What are they best known for now? They're best known for becoming a meme by pissing off a driver, basically. It's yeah.
I mean,
it's a right old mess, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, going back to last season as well. I mean, that Alonso Ocon partnership was a bit of a rogue one as well,
Wasn't great,
because
was
they
it?
didn't handle them very well, did they? They both thought they were they both thought they were number one driver.
Yeah, that's right. It didn't really feel like it was ever going to be a particularly good pairing anyway, and so it proved to be throughout the course of the season. So yeah, that definitely was a mistake, and I totally agree with you about Schaffner. I think he was put in a really poor, in a really unfortunate position there. And yeah, alongside sort of getting done by Alonso, there's an element of like, all it took was a conversation with Aston Martin where they probably said to him, "We're building you a Red Bull replica for next season. We'll give you a multi-year deal, and we're going to pay you pretty well. What
And
more do you want?"
we've got a brand new factory being opened in less than a year's time.
Yeah, job done. We want you. Why would you stay with Alpine? And there you go. And then obviously the kind of Piastri thing happened after that. It's just, yeah.
Well, I suppose that's a nice sort of link you've created as far as there, because if you compare Aston Martin and you compare Alpine, of the two, I would say that Alpine as a Formula One team just feels like a marketing exercise, and there's no sort of credible sporting sort of endeavor sort of attached to it at all, really. Whereas the thing with Aston Martin, very similar constructor, similar constructor, obviously not an engine constructor, but similar sort of team, trying to sell cars, and that was why Lawrence Stroll brought Aston Martin to get his son a confirmed seat, but also to help turn around Aston Martin, the car making business as well. And I think they've probably done quite a good job at making Aston Martins quite attractive cars to buy, because they look like a really high performing, well performing team. Whereas I don't know, I just can't see at the moment that Alpine is just a rebrand exercise 2 years ago by Renault just to sell or to try and raise the profile of their sport car business, and they don't really take it that seriously, or they think it's easy to just dick around and quickly win world championships, or be at the front, but they don't have ambitions to be world championships or that drive to be world champions in the same way that Aston Martin are on a hellbent mission to get there, and they're signing the best, they're building the best factory, they've got the resources, they're copying designs of other cars that they think is even quicker. Whereas you just don't get that at all from Alpine. You think are they just an entity just to sell cars?
Yeah, and this is part of probably why they've been stuck in the midfield as long as they have, because that's exactly where you would put a team that's based primarily around marketing, not so towards the front, because they've not got a long term strategy and don't really care about winning races and championships, despite what their 100 race strategy would say. But equally not so terrible that they're at the back and a bit of a lull in Formula One, to such an extent that the brand is being damaged. They're in there enough to do what they want, but not so much without them having to commit the money to actually, the money and the broader resources and efforts to try and win races, as you would need to. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't really see a way forwards for them beyond continuing in midfield. Like, unless something really significant changes at a kind of structural level, and we see the Formula One team given a level of independence they've just not had for a long time, and they appoint some good people, and they can move to this kind of slightly longer term strategy for development. It doesn't really feel like it's gonna improve. If anything, they're going to probably be caught up by some other teams, because Audi are coming. First of all, I mean, good luck, everyone. Audi are coming,
and and Audi are taking their time to get ready for it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've no doubt Audi are going to rock up with, if not the best engine, one of the best engines. What they do aerodynamically with the design of the car, I mean, they're going to have a bit of a head start because everyone's going to be adopting a Red Bull kind of model anyway. They're going to be in the mix. Williams are always improving, as we've talked about. McLaren and Aston Martin have both already overtaken them, plus the 3 customer teams. They are the 6th fastest team as it stands at the moment. AlphaTauri are being brought back into the Red Bull fold by the sounds of it. They're going to be using this year's Red Bull next year. There is every chance that car is faster than whatever Alpine build in the winter. Like they could find themselves, if not right at the back, certainly towards the back.
Well, that only leaves Haas and as sort of competitors. So you could see a world in which in 2 seasons' time, it's the Haas and the Alpine just making up the numbers a lap behind everyone else because they've just been completely left out by everyone else developing so much quicker and further forward.
Yeah. So before Audi announced they'd bought Sauber, Alfa Romeo's there at the moment, I did wonder if Alpine maybe are one of the teams that they were going to just try and buy. They must have been on the list, and they talked to McLaren, didn't they, as well? But McLaren didn't want to sell. But given the kind of investment, they've had a load of investment in the Alpine recently from some fairly famous people.
Yeah, they've had $218 million, which works out as £171 million for 24% of the Alpine Formula One team. So that values the business at about just shy of $1 billion, which is quite impressive for a team that is not that great. And that actually did grab a lot of headlines at the time because it was 3 capital management investment organizations. But I think the reason why it grabbed headlines is because it was Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney, and Michael B. Jordan were sort of some of the public people attached to those investment organizations. So obviously that got a lot of hype of saying, here comes Hollywood to Formula One, and welcome to Alpine, sort of play on that. But I think that investment is really interesting because that could drive Alpine to go in a completely different direction because they can't be happy with how things are going, and I'd love to know what involvement they had in the decision to get rid of all these senior people. I'm sure it probably wasn't supportive or fully supportive. And do you think this is a sign that they could sell up Renault because they've done it before? They've sold it off before. They've pulled out. Do you think we could see end of this season, end of next season, them putting it on the market?
Maybe. I mean, if we proceed on the assumption that this is a bit of a marketing exercise and they're just trying to sell more sports cars, at what point? I mean, we talked a bit about it there already. At what point does their lack of performance become a detriment to their brand? I mean, I would say their brand has already been irrevocably damaged the last 12 months because of the stuff that happened with Alonso and Piastri, and obviously what's happened recently with them sacking their entire team halfway through a weekend. Still mental. I mean, at what point do you cut your losses and move on and sell up? Because there are people who are desperate to get involved in the sport, and getting an 11th team agreed looks like it's going to be really difficult now.
Yeah. I'm thinking, if I'm General Motors Andretti and I don't get that 11th team, and because everyone else blocks it, I'd pick off either Haas or Alpine and be like, what's your price? We'll pay it.
Yeah, it could happen. I mean, they're the 2 candidates, aren't they? Now, I think I don't think there's anybody else.
I mean, there's a few others. There's a few in the background. There's a few vague. There's the 50-50 one where like half the workforce is women and half the workforce is men. And there's a few other rumored ones as well. I think Saudi Arabia were thinking about putting a team in. I think I remember reading that a while ago. That'd probably be Neymar and Cristiano Ronaldo driving for them.
I was about to say Ronaldo's a bit big, I think, for a Formula One driver, but Neymar and Messi, them lot, I reckon they'd give it a go if need be.
Jordan Henderson and Steven Gerrard as the team principal.
Their team radio would be fun.
I wouldn't try to do a Scouse accent.
No, I'm not gonna try to attempt that while we're recording. Maybe when we finish recording, I'll have a go.
Very good. But I going back to Alpine though. I think what you were saying about where do they go next, sort of donut wise. I just can see them selling up. I just can't see them sticking around. I just think it's going so badly. The level of investment to get them further up. It really wouldn't surprise me if they they sell because if 25% is roughly over $200 million, they could easily get £500 million for the next 75% of it, and maybe Todd Bowley, the Chelsea owner, might want to waste a bit more money and buy them as well as every living player that's under the sun. Sorry, I'm mixing with football there, but
there we go. The first of many, I'm sure, this season. No, I wouldn't be surprised to see them sold, particularly like an Andretti or whatever. You're right. If they can't get an 11th team through, I fil like they're going to put a bid in for a team for sure. Just a question of which one they're likely to get accepted, because it's tough to buy Formula One teams these days.
Yeah. I think my final thought on Alpine is I think this second half of the season is crucial because it will be interesting to see if they get a team principal in and when. Will they wait to the off season? And if they let's say they've got this incompetent engine development chap that's been in charge of the worst engine in 4 years as their team principal, what happens if things actually get worse and they start making more errors and more things go wrong? That's just going to make them even more of a laughing stock, and they will just fall further down the constructors table. It only takes a couple of teams to sort their act out, and they'll to score points regularly, and they'll soon be lower than sixth. I still think there could be drama with Ocon and Gasly. They've had history in the past. They've kind of not really fallen out yet because they've kind of been unlucky in taking each other out or been hit by others and taking each other out. But if one of them winds the other one up, and if the stress and the pressure of the situation gets to one of them and they start then taking it onto the race circuit, wouldn't write off a bit of fireworks between those two.
No, I think you're right. I feel like that will be that feels like a probable symptom of the situation at some stage. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our special podcast all about Alpine. Sorry, Alpine listeners and Alpine fans. It's been a bit of a deep dive into what an absolute show and shower that team is right now. Fingers crossed for some improvement. Thanks very much for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed the podcast, why don't you share it with a friend? Hopefully they enjoy it more than the Alpine Twitter admin has enjoyed all of the tweets from Oscar Piastri and others resurfacing this week as part of the anniversary. It kind of been fun to manage. There were a lot of fun memes. As always, F1 Twitter doesn't fail to disappoint. On Twitter, we are at Lights Out Lads, and on Instagram, we are at Lights Out Pod. Will, we are going to talk about some unsung heroes, aren't we, next week?
Yeah, well, I think you came up with this idea. I think it's a really nice idea for us to just highlight a few people, a few roles that doesn't really get much love. I mean, the people we just sort of spitballing a few ideas, and a few of the people we suggested, like we've not mentioned at all in 25 episodes of this podcast. So I think it's a really good opportunity to highlight some of these figures and talk about them. And if you're new to Formula One, you might not even know some of these people, or it gives you the opportunity to learn more about some of the people and the roles they fulfill within the world of Formula One. So yeah, I think that'd be a really nice one next week to sort of shine a light in some different parts of Formula One world rather than on just the drivers or the team principals or what's going on in the races. So don't make sure you don't miss it. That's all from us. All the best and goodbye.
Au revoir, mon ami.
Very good. Very good.